Brenda Mackey pulled the folded paper from Zara's apron pocket before the girl even realized what was happening. She unfolded it slowly, read the first line. Then she laughed the kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh at all. "I want to be the first in my family to graduate college." Brenda's voice carried across every table in the diner. She set the paper down on the counter and shook her head. "Honey, you're a broke little black girl from Harlow. Georgia State doesn't want you. Nobody wants you." Deputy Holt looked up from his coffee, grinned. "College." He said the word like it was a punchline. "That's real cute. Your mama couldn't finish high school, and you think you're going to college, baby. Your whole family tree doesn't have a single branch worth climbing." The table beside him snickered. Someone muttered something Zara couldn't fully hear. She didn't need to. Then Brenda leaned across the counter, voice dropping just low enough to feel intimate the way cruelty does when it wants to make sure you feel it in your bones. "You know what your problem is, sweetheart. You keep forgetting what you are. Now get back to work before I find someone who actually belongs here." The diner went quiet. Tommy in the booth by the window stared at his plate. Zara Coleman, 16 years old, $9 in her apron, dreams folded into that single sheet of paper, reached out, picked it up without a word and put it back in her pocket. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. But the old man at table 4 had heard every word. And he was watching her with an expression nobody in that room noticed, because nobody in that room was paying attention to him yet. They would be. Very soon. Don't go anywhere. This story goes somewhere nobody in Harlow saw coming. Drop your city and local time in the comments right now. And if you believe a broke little black girl from a small town can shake an entire county to its foundation, you already know why you should subscribe. Harlow, Georgia had a population of 3,200 people, 1 traffic light, and a very long memory. It was the kind of town where everybody knew their name, knew their family, knew exactly which side of the county road they came from. The kind of town where the diner on Main Street had been owned by the same family for 30 years, where the same deputy had patrolled the same 3 streets for the past decade, and where certain things were understood without ever being spoken aloud. Certain people had options. Certain people did not. Zara Coleman had always known which category she fell into. She was 16 years old, 5'4", with her grandmother's cheekbones and her mother's stubborn jaw. She wore her hair natural, pulled back on school days, loose on weekends when there was time to let it breathe. She was the kind of student teachers either loved or resented, the kind who asked too many questions and always had the answer ready before anyone else, but who never made you feel stupid about it. Her English teacher, Mr. Aldridge, had told her once that she wrote like someone twice her age. She'd kept that sentence in the back of her mind ever since pulling it out on the hard days like a smooth stone in her pocket. There were a lot of hard days. The Coleman house sat on a 1/4 acre at the end of Piney Creek Road, 3 miles outside of Harlow's actual center, if you were being generous about what counted as a center. The house had been in the family since Zara's great-grandmother bought it in 1971, the first property on that road owned by a black family, a fact the neighbors at the time had made abundantly clear they resented. The house had good bones, Nana Ruth always said. Good bones and bad luck. The front porch had a broken step, the 3rd one from the bottom. The wood, soft and splintered, had been that way for 2 years. Every time Zara came home, she stepped over it automatically, without thinking. The paint on the east side of the house was peeling in long strips, revealing the gray wood beneath. The vegetable garden out back was the best-kept thing on the property, rows of collard greens, tomatoes, snap peas, and sweet potatoes that Nana Ruth tended like they were her children. Because in practical terms, they were. That garden kept food on the table during the months when the numbers didn't work. Ruth Coleman was 63 years old, retired from 22 years as a school cafeteria cook and diabetic. Her insulin prescription cost $260 a month. Her Social Security check was $1,140. After rent, utilities, and medication, that left $210 for everything else: groceries, gas for the 1998 Buick that ran when it felt like it, and whatever else the world decided to demand that month. Zara had been doing this math since she was 12 years old. She understood it better than most adults understood their own finances. Ruth never complained. That was the thing about her: she had the particular dignity of someone who had survived too much to waste energy on self-pity. She hummed while she cooked. She kept the house clean. She went to church on Sundays and meant every word she sang. But Zara had seen her mother skip insulin doses 3 times in the past 2 months, cutting the pen down to half the prescribed amount when the refill money wasn't there yet. The last time Ruth had fainted in the vegetable garden on a Tuesday afternoon. Zara had been at school. A neighbor, Mrs. Tatum from 2 houses down, had seen her fall and called an ambulance. Harlow County had 1 ambulance unit. It had been on the other side of the county. It took 41 minutes to arrive. Zara had gotten the call in the middle of third period algebra, and actually ran the entire 3 miles home because the school bus didn't leave until 3:15 and she couldn't wait. By the time she got there, Ruth was sitting up on the porch steps with a glass of sweet tea, embarrassed and waving her off. "I'm fine, baby, I'm fine." Zara had sat down beside her on the good step, the 4th one, and not said anything for a long time. That was 6 weeks ago. The scholarship application had been Zara's idea, entirely her own. She'd found the Georgia State opportunity online at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, reading through the requirements 3 times to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding something. Merit-based. First-generation applicants encouraged. Essays weighted heavily. Application fee $75, non-refundable, due in 3 weeks. $75. She had typed the first draft of her personal essay in one sitting, 2 hours straight, the words coming out faster than she could organize them. She'd revised it 4 times after that, printing it at the school library because the printer at home had been broken since November. She kept the printed copy folded in her apron pocket during her shifts at Brenda's diner. Not for any particular reason, just because it felt important to keep it close. Like a compass. Brenda's diner was where Zara worked 4 evenings a week, 4 to 8 p.m., $8.50 an hour. Brenda Mackey had owned the place for 11 years. She wasn't openly cruel, not most of the time. She was the specific kind of person who believed she was being reasonable while doing unreasonable things, who thought that because she paid Zara on time, she had nothing to answer for. She scheduled Zara for the closing shifts nobody else wanted. She docked her pay for breaks that ran 2 minutes long. She had never once in 2 years asked Zara how school was going. The tips averaged $9 a night on a good night, less on Tuesdays. It was a Tuesday. Zara was halfway through her shift clearing table 6 and mentally calculating how many more shifts she'd need before she had enough for the application fee when the bell above the diner door chimed. She looked up. An old man stepped inside from the rain. He was soaked through completely. Not the kind of damp you get from a quick dash between a car door and a building entrance. This was hours of rain, the kind that works its way through every layer until there's nothing dry left. His khaki trousers were muddied at the cuffs. His white Oxford shirt had gone translucent across the shoulders. His silver hair was plastered flat against his skull, and his eyes pale blue. The color of shallow water moved around the diner in slow, uncertain arcs, like a man trying to find something he'd already forgotten he was looking for. He was somewhere in his mid-70s, Zara guessed. Well-built, once broad-shouldered, though age had softened the edges. He wore a plain gold wedding band on his left hand, worn smooth the way rings get after decades of wearing. His shoes were good leather, not cheap, not new. The kind of shoes that had been expensive a long time ago and had been worn faithfully ever since. So he stood just inside the door for a moment, water dripping from his sleeves onto the linoleum, and looked around the diner the way a child looks around a room they've never been in before. Brenda was behind the counter, not looking up from her phone. "We're not a shelter," she said without raising her eyes. "If you're eating, sit down. If you're not, the door's right behind you." The old man didn't seem to register this. He walked slowly to the counter, pulled out a stool, and sat down. He picked up the laminated menu and held it up upside down. He studied it with a slight frown, as though the problem was the lighting. Zara set down the dish rack she was carrying and walked over. "Can I get you some water, sir?" He looked up at her. Something in his expression shifted, not quite recognition, but something adjacent to it. Warmth, maybe. Relief at being addressed directly. "Yes," he said. "Yes, that would be very kind." His voice was educated, measured, the voice of a man who had spent decades in rooms where his words carried weight. Zara flipped his menu right side up without drawing attention to it and went to get his water. Brenda watched her from the corner of her eye. "Don't waste your time," she said quietly, low enough that it wouldn't carry to the counter. "He probably doesn't have 2 dimes. Zara didn't respond. She brought the water, set it down carefully. The old man's hands closed around the glass, and she noticed they were trembling. Not the fine tremor of cold alone. A deeper, more persistent shake. She also noticed, as his sleeve shifted back, a medical alert bracelet on his left wrist. Red symbol. Engraved metal. She didn't read it yet. "The chicken soup," he said, pointing at the menu with one unsteady finger. "And cornbread if you have it." "We have it," Zara said. "I'll put that in." She turned toward the kitchen window. Brenda stepped in front of her, voice flat. "He pays first. House rule." It wasn't a house rule. There was no sign. Zara had never once asked a customer to pay before eating. But she didn't say any of that. She walked back to the old man. "Sir, do you have your card or—" He was already reaching into his back pocket. He pulled out a slim leather wallet, opened it, and looked inside for a long moment. The look on his face changed slowly, the way weather changes, gradual at first, then sudden. His brow furrowed. He checked the other pocket, then the breast pocket of his shirt, then back to the wallet. He stopped. "I had money. I know I had money." His voice had lost its steadiness. "I had it this morning. I'm certain I did." "It's all right," Zara said. "I don't understand where—" He looked at his hands as if they might offer an explanation. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I don't—" "Sir." Zara kept her voice even. "It's all right. Just sit tight for a second." She turned. Brenda was already shaking her head. "No ticket, no food," Brenda said, louder than necessary. "I run a business, not a soup kitchen." The other customers were looking now. A couple near the window. The table of 3 by the jukebox. And Deputy Holt alone in the corner booth, coffee cup halfway to his mouth, watching with the particular attention of a man who enjoys seeing how things unfold. Zara reached into her apron pocket. She counted what was there. 6 ones, a 5 4/4, $9. Her tips for the night, every cent of it. Enough to cover half of what she needed for the application fee. Enough to buy Nana Ruth's prescription refill supplements for the week. Enough to mean something. She counted it once. Counted it again. Then she looked at the old man's hands still trembling around the empty glass. Looked at his pale, wet face. Looked at the confusion in his eyes. Not the confusion of someone being difficult, but the confusion of someone genuinely lost inside their own mind. She slid the $9 across the counter to Brenda without a word. Brenda took it, rang it up, said nothing. Zara called the order through the window and brought the soup herself when it was ready, setting it down gently in front of him. Steam curled up from the bowl. The old man wrapped both unsteady hands around it and closed his eyes for just a moment, The way you do when something arrives that you needed more than you realized. Thank you, he said quietly. I don't know your name. Zara, she said. He nodded slowly like he was filing it somewhere deliberate and careful. Zara. That was when she noticed the engraving on the bracelet more clearly. She leaned slightly forward and read it. Chester Baines. Early stage dementia. If found, please call James Baines 4045550193. Her stomach dropped. She looked at the man at Chester who was eating his soup in slow, careful spoonfuls, color already beginning to return to his face. Then she looked at Deputy Holt's corner booth. He was still watching. And beside his coffee cup, Zara's scholarship essay, the one Brenda had taken from her apron pocket earlier and left lying on the counter, was still sitting there, unfolded face up for anyone to read. Deputy Holt stood up slowly. That was the thing about him, he never rushed. Rushing implied urgency, and urgency implied that something mattered enough to hurry for. Dale Holt had been a deputy in Harlow County for 11 years, and in 11 years he had developed the particular unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been told he'd gone too far. He hitched his belt, picked up his coffee cup, set it back down. Then he walked across the diner floor toward the counter, boot heels deliberate on the linoleum, and every person in the room felt the atmosphere shift the way you feel a drop in pressure before a storm. Zara heard him coming before she saw him. She was standing near Chester's stool, watching to make sure the soup stayed warm when Holt's shadow crossed the counter. What exactly do you think you're doing, girl? She turned. He was closer than necessary, the way people stand when they want the distance itself to be a message. He needed a meal, Zara said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that later. I paid for it. Holt looked at Chester with the expression of a man examining something mildly inconvenient left on his doorstep. Then he looked back at Zara. You paid for it. He repeated it slowly, like he was tasting the absurdity of it. He turned to the room, actually turned, made sure he had the audience he wanted. You hear that? This girl, he gestured at Zara with an open hand, spent her tip money feeding a stranger, while her grandmama's home rationing insulin. He shook his head. Now I don't know if that's noble or just plain stupid, but either way. He reached out and took the tray from Zara's hands. He didn't snatch it. That was almost worse. He took it calmly, with the ease of someone who has never been told they cannot take things. The bowl tipped. The soup, a second helping Zara had brought without being asked, sloshed over the rim and spread in a dark red stain across Chester's sleeve. The room went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Chester looked down at his sleeve, slowly. Then he looked up at Holt with an expression that was harder to read than the confusion from before. Something had sharpened in his pale eyes, a brief clear flash of a man who had once known exactly how to handle a room. That, Chester said quietly, was unnecessary, young man. Holt didn't look at him. He set the tray on the counter and turned back to Zara. Clock out, he said. You're done for the night. My shift doesn't end until 8, Zara said. I said you're done. Brenda Mackey behind the counter did not move, did not speak. She had found something very important to look at on her phone, and she was looking at it with great concentration. Tommy Garrett in the booth by the window, Zara's classmate 17, a decent enough kid on most days, had gone completely pale. He was gripping the edge of the table with both hands and staring at the surface of it as though it contained the answers to questions he didn't want to ask. He would think about this moment for years afterward, about the fact that he said nothing. Nobody said anything. Holt picked up Zara's essay from the counter. He hadn't forgotten about it. He'd been planning this part. He held it up, not reading it, just holding it, letting the room see what it was. Then he looked at Zara with something worse than anger, something almost gentle. You wrote here that you want to study public policy. He folded the paper once slowly. Public policy. He set it back down on the counter. Baby, you can barely keep this job. You think anyone in Atlanta is going to sit in a classroom with... He paused. Let the pause do the work. With someone like you. Zara's jaw was tight. She could feel her pulse in her temples. Someone like me, she repeated. You know what I mean. Say what you mean then. For just a fraction of a second, something moved across Holt's face. Not shame, it wasn't that. More like surprise. He wasn't accustomed to being asked to finish his sentences. But then it passed. He straightened, hitched his belt again. Clock out. Zara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Brenda, who was still looking at her phone. Then at Tommy, who finally raised his eyes just briefly, just long enough to look away again. Then she picked up a stack of paper napkins from the counter. Dispenser walked around to Chester's stool and began carefully blotting the soup from his sleeve. It's all right, she told him quietly. It'll come out. Chester's hand found her wrist gently, the way an elderly person reaches for something steady. Are you all right? He asked. Not the way people ask when they don't want an answer. The real way. I'm fine, she said. She wasn't, but she would be. She walked to the kitchen window. Used her meal credit, the one Brenda allowed staff for one item per shift, to order another bowl of tomato soup. She carried it out herself, set it in front of Chester's, and stood with him while he finished it. 34 minutes. She timed it without meaning to. When he was done, he set the spoon down and looked at her. Zara, he said, slowly, deliberately. Zara Coleman. He nodded like he was pressing the name into something solid. I need to remember that. He said it twice more under his breath as she helped him with his coat. Zara Coleman. Zara Coleman. She walked him to the door. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. She watched him go, then turned back to the diner. The security camera above the register, the one Brenda had installed 3 years ago after a register theft and mostly forgotten about, blinked its small red light in the corner of the room. It had recorded everything, every word, every second, every napkin. Zara didn't know that yet. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Zara stepped out of Brenda's diner at 7:43 p.m. Not 8 o'clock. Not the end of her shift. 7:43 because Dale Holt had told her to clock out, and Brenda Mackey had said nothing, and sometimes the most exhausting thing in the world is fighting a battle when you're the only one who showed up armed. She had her backpack, her jacket, the essay folded back into her apron pocket. She did not have her $9. The walk home was 1.4 miles. She had done it hundreds of times in August heat, in January cold, in rain like tonight. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every place where the streetlights went dark, every dog that barked from behind a fence on Sycamore Road. She walked it on autopilot, her mind somewhere else, entirely doing the math she always did on the walk home. The math was not good tonight. $75 for the application fee. She'd had $9 tonight. Gone. Her next shift, if Brenda even scheduled her, was Thursday. 4 hours, maybe. $34 before tax. She owed Mrs. Tatum $6 for the eggs she'd borrowed last week. Nana Ruth's prescription supplements needed restocking by Friday. The application deadline was in 19 days. She did the math 3 different ways and got the same answer every time. It didn't work. It never worked. She turned onto Piney Creek Road and saw the light on in the front room. The warm yellow glow of the lamp by Nana Ruth's recliner, visible through the curtain. Something in Zara's chest loosened slightly at the sight of it. It always did. Whatever else was wrong, that light meant Nana Ruth was awake and upright and fine. She stepped over the broken third porch step automatically and pushed open the front door. Nana Ruth was in her recliner, the television on low, a word puzzle book open in her lap. She looked up when Zara came in, reading her granddaughter's face the way she always did, quickly, thoroughly missing nothing. "Slow night?" she asked. "Yeah," Zara said. "Slow night." She hung her jacket on the hook by the door and set her backpack against the wall. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water and stood at the counter drinking it, staring at the window above the sink, the dark glass reflecting her own face back at her. "Baby," Nana Ruth called from the other room. "Can you bring me my pill organizer? Left it on the counter." Zara looked down. The pill organizer was right there, a white plastic weekly case, each day's compartment labeled in Ruth's careful handwriting. She picked it up, started to carry it to the other room, then stopped. She stood very still in the kitchen doorway. The organizer was open to this week. She could see it clearly, the remaining compartments Wednesday through Sunday. She counted the insulin doses the way she'd been counting them for months now, automatically, the way you count things you're afraid to count. 7 doses, 8 days left until the refill. She knew what that meant. She'd seen it before. She walked into the living room and handed Nana Ruth the organizer without saying anything about it. Ruth took it, snapped Wednesday's compartment open, tipped the pills into her palm. "I'll figure it out," Ruth said, not looking up. She said it the way you say something you've already said too many times, worn smooth, automatic. "You said that last time," Zara said quietly, "and I was fine." "You fainted in this garden, Nana." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up, and her face was the face of a woman who had survived too much to be undone by a pill organizer, but who was also tired in a way she didn't have words for anymore. "Half dose on the last day," she said. "It'll be fine, baby." Zara sat down on the couch across from her. She wanted to say something, to argue, to problem solve, to fix it the way she always tried to fix things. But tonight, the words weren't there. Tonight she just sat and looked at her grandmother in the lamplight, at the worn edges of her, at the dignity she carried, like it weighed nothing when Zara knew it weighed everything. "Okay," Zara said finally. "Okay." She went to the kitchen and opened the cupboard. Half a bag of rice, 1 can of black beans, 4 eggs, a quarter jar of peanut butter. She stood in front of the open cupboard for a long moment, then closed it and made rice and beans, because that was what there was. While the rice cooked, she sat at the kitchen table with her scholarship essay and read it again. All 4 pages. She'd read it so many times she knew it by memory, but she read it again anyway, looking for what Brenda Mackey had laughed at, trying to see it through those eyes. Trying to find the part that was foolish. She couldn't find it. She folded it back up, set it on the table. That was when she felt it in her apron pocket, small metal, cool against her fingers. She pulled it out and looked at it. Chester's medical alert bracelet. It must have slipped from his wrist when she'd helped him with his coat, caught in the fabric of her apron, without either of them noticing. She turned it over in her fingers, read the engraving again in the kitchen light. Chester Baines, early stage dementia. If found, please call James Baines 404-555-0193. She set it on the kitchen table next to the scholarship essay. 2 objects. One represented everything she was reaching toward. One belonged to a confused old man who had eaten soup in a diner and said her name 3 times like a prayer. She fell asleep at the kitchen table with the lights on her head, on her folded arms, the bracelet, and the essay side by side in front of her. 47 miles away, at 11:22 p.m., a phone rang. James Baines had been awake since 7 that morning. Not unusual for him, he ran a $2.1 billion infrastructure development company and had trained himself decades ago to treat sleep as a variable rather than a constant. What was unusual was the specific quality of this particular wakefulness, the kind that comes not from a board meeting or a quarterly report, but from something older and more animal, the kind that comes from not knowing where your father is. Chester Baines had wandered away from a rest stop on Interstate 75 at approximately 3:15 p.m. that afternoon. He had been traveling with his personal aide, a young man named Eric, who had stopped to use the restroom for 4 minutes. 4 minutes, James would repeat this to himself many times in the hours that followed, and when Eric came back out, the passenger seat of the car was empty. By the time James got the call, it was 4:40 p.m. By 5:30, he had a 4-person security team driving a grid pattern across a 30-mile radius. By 7 p.m., he had filed a missing persons report with Harlow County Sheriff's Department, which had been received by a desk officer with the particular energy of someone who had already decided this was not their most pressing concern that evening. By 9 p.m., James was in his car driving south on I-75 himself, his wife Olivia in the passenger seat, with her hand on his arm, saying his name periodically, in the steady, measured way she had learned to say it when his jaw was that tight. The call from Harlow County Hospital came at 11:22 p.m. A nurse named Patricia had found Chester wandering along County Road 18, approximately 2 miles from Brenda's diner, confused and tired, but physically uninjured. She had called the number on his medical alert bracelet, or tried to. No answer. She had then called the general emergency line associated with the bracelet's registration. James took the call, doing 85 miles per hour on a dark Georgia highway. He pulled over. His hands were shaking. "He's okay," Olivia said, reading his face. "James, he's okay." Chester was in a hospital bed when they arrived, wearing a paper gown, eating crackers from a small plastic packet, looking both diminished and oddly peaceful. He looked up when James walked in, and for one terrible half-second, James saw the blankness, the non-recognition that came sometimes now, the face of a stranger wearing his father's face. Then it passed. Chester's eyes focused. "Jimmy," he said. James sat on the edge of the bed and took his father's hand and didn't say anything for a while. Later, when Chester had been checked over by the attending physician and declared stable and ready to transfer to his regular care facility in the morning, James sat in the plastic chair beside the bed and asked him quietly what he remembered about the afternoon. Chester was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed with the particular effort of someone trying to retrieve something through deep water. "A girl," he said finally. "A diner. A young black girl." He paused. "She fed me. When I couldn't, I didn't have—" He stopped. Started again. "She paid. Out of her own pocket. And then there was a man who—" His face darkened. He didn't finish the sentence, but his jaw was set, the way James recognized from decades of watching his father in difficult rooms. "Her name," Chester looked at him directly. Zara Coleman. Remember that name?" He said it twice more before he fell asleep. The next morning, James asked his assistant Sandra to pull the security footage from Brenda's diner on Main Street in Harlow. Sandra had it within 40 minutes. The diner's system was old, cloud-backed, accessible with a standard records request that James's legal team processed before 8 a.m. He watched it on his laptop at the hotel breakfast table, Olivia sitting across from him with her coffee. He watched it once. Then he set down his fork and watched it again. He watched Zara count the $9, watched her slide it across the counter without hesitation, watched Brenda Mackey pull the essay from Zara's apron pocket and hold it up to the room, watched the table laugh, watched Tommy looked away, watched Zara fold it back up with hands that were almost steady. He watched Holt take the tray, watched the soup hit Chester's sleeve, watched the room go silent and stay silent. Watched Zara clean it up alone with paper napkins while Brenda looked at her phone. He watched Zara use her meal credit to replace the soup. Watched her stand with Chester for 34 minutes while he ate. Watched her help him with his coat. Watched Chester at the door mouth her name 3 times. Olivia had put down her coffee. James watched it a 3rd time. His jaw was tight. His right hand flat on the table was pressing down hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "James," Olivia said. He didn't respond. Then he picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to his attorney. The second was to his helicopter pilot. He stood up from the breakfast table and buttoned his jacket. Navy suit. No tie. No, he hadn't slept enough to manage a tie. "Where are you going?" Olivia asked. "Piney Creek Road," he said. "I need to find a girl named Zara Coleman." He walked out of the hotel into the Georgia morning. The air was cold and clean after last night's rain. His pilot confirmed wheels up in 40 minutes from the regional airfield, a 28-minute flight to the open field coordinates Sandra had pulled from county property records. James Baines had built 3 hospitals, 2 highway interchanges, and a pedestrian bridge over the Chattahoochee River. He had sat across negotiating tables from senators and City Hall, and had never once in his professional life been told no in a way that actually stuck. He had watched a 16-year-old girl spend her last $9 on his father's soup, and then get humiliated for it in front of a full room. He was not going to be late. Zara heard it before she understood what it was. She was in the backyard at 9:17 a.m. helping Nana Ruth hang the Wednesday laundry on the line, pillowcases, dish towels, the blue cotton house dress Ruth wore on Sundays. The morning was cool and clear, last night's rain leaving everything washed and sharp-edged. The vegetable garden dark with good wet soil, the snap peas glossy on their lines. The sound came from the north. Low at first, a rhythmic thrum, distant enough that Zara's mind filed it under background and kept moving. She reached into the laundry basket for a pillowcase. Then it got louder. Ruth stopped with a clothespin in her hand. Looked up. The sound became a vibration. Zara felt it in her sternum before she could fully locate it in the sky. Then she saw it cresting the tree line at the north end of Piney Creek Road, a helicopter white with a dark blue stripe descending in a long, controlled arc toward the open field adjacent to the property. The field where nothing grew, where kids sometimes cut through on the way to the creek, where a rusted gate had been standing open for as long as Zara could remember. The laundry on the line began to ripple, then billow. Ruth grabbed the blue house dress before it went airborne. "Lord have mercy, child," Ruth said. She grabbed Zara's arm with her free hand. "What did you do?" "I don't know," Zara said. And that was the truth. The helicopter set down in the field with a precision that suggested the pilot had done this in tighter spaces. The rotors slowed. The side door opened. A man stepped out. He was in his early 60s, tall, broad-shouldered in the way that doesn't leave you even when the years start coming. Navy suit, no tie. Silver hair that the rotor wash had done nothing to improve. He moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who had long ago stopped needing to prove anything to anyone, not arrogance exactly, but the specific confidence of a man who had walked into difficult rooms for 40 years and always found his way to the other side of them. He looked across the field toward the yard. Found Zara immediately. He walked toward the fence line with the same deliberate pace, the grass still flattened around him from the rotor wash. And Zara stood very still and watched him come. Her hand found Chester's medical alert bracelet in her jacket pocket. She'd transferred it there this morning, without quite knowing why, the same way you keep hold of something that might matter. He stopped at the fence. looked at her directly. "Are you Zara Coleman?" His voice was calm, not the performed calm of someone managing a difficult situation, the real kind. Like the answer mattered, but the asking didn't need to be dramatic. "Yes," Zara said. He opened the gate, walked into the yard, extended his hand. "My name is James Baines. Chester Baines is my father." He paused. "He said your name 4 times before he fell asleep last night. I came to say thank you." Behind Zara, Ruth had gone completely still. The blue house dress was still in her hands. Her eyes moved between James Baines and the helicopter in the field with the expression of a woman rapidly revising her understanding of how a Wednesday morning was supposed to go. "Is he all right?" Zara asked. That was the first thing she thought to say. Not "who are you" or "how did you find me?" "Is he all right?" Something moved across James's face. "He's stable. He's at his care facility." He looked at her steadily. "He was at Harlow County Hospital last night. A nurse found him on County Road 18, about 2 miles from the diner. If he'd been outside another hour in that cold—" He stopped, started again. "He has a condition that affects his judgment, his memory. He doesn't always know where he is or how to get back. Last night he was lucky." "He was cold," Zara said. "His lips were—" "I know." James nodded. "I watched the footage." The words landed quietly. Zara processed them. "The security camera," she said. "Yes." She reached into her jacket pocket and held out the medical alert bracelet. "This came off when I was helping him with his coat. I didn't realize until I got home." James looked at the bracelet in her palm for a moment. Then he took it carefully, the way you take something someone has been keeping safe for you. He turned it over once in his fingers, put it in his pocket. "Miss Coleman," he said, "I'd like to come inside if that's all right. There are some things I want to show you and your grandmother, and some things I'd like to discuss." Ruth spoke for the first time since the helicopter had landed. Her voice was measured, the voice of a woman who had learned not to let surprise show until she understood what she was surprised about. "You're welcome in our home, Mr. Baines," she said. "Come in." They went inside. James waited in the small living room, while Zara and Ruth settled Ruth in her recliner, Zara on the edge of the couch, both of them with the particular stillness of people trying to read a situation before it reads them. James's assistant, Sandra, who had come in quietly behind him, set a leather briefcase on the coffee table and stood near the door. James sat down, looked at Zara. "Before I show you anything," he said, "I want to tell you what I saw on that footage." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I watched it 3 times, and I need you to know." He paused. The pause was not for effect. It was the pause of a man choosing words that are accurate. "What was done to you in that diner last night was wrong. The deputy, the owner, every person in that room who said nothing." He looked at her directly. "You deserved better, and I'm sorry it happened." The room was very quiet. Nana Ruth's hand found Zara's wrist. Zara did not cry. But it was a near thing, not because of the apology itself, but because of the specific relief of being seen accurately by someone with no reason to lie about it. "I also watched what you did," James said. "All of it." He reached for the briefcase. "And I'd like to talk about that." James Baines opened the briefcase with the careful efficiency of a man who had prepared for this conversation, the way he prepared for everything thoroughly, specifically, without leaving anything to chance. He pulled out a tablet first, set it on the coffee table, and turned it toward Zara and Ruth. "I want to show you what I saw," he said. "Not to make you relive something difficult, but because I think you deserve to know that someone watched it, really watched it, and understood what it meant." He pressed play. The footage was grainy in the way of older security systems, the color slightly washed, the timestamp blinking in the upper right corner in white numerals. But it was clear enough. Clear enough to see Zara at the counter counting $9 in her palm. Clear enough to see the deliberate way she set it down, not rushed, not dramatic, just decided. Clear enough to see Brenda pull the essay from the apron pocket, hold it up, say whatever she said while the table laughed. Ruth made a sound beside Zara. Not a word. Just a sound. Zara watched herself on the small screen fold the essay back up with shaking hands. She hadn't realized her hands were shaking at the time. Seeing it now was different from living it. James let the footage run through Holt's approach, through the tray, through the soup hitting Chester's sleeve. Through the 34 minutes, Zara stood with Chester, while the room went back to its business, and Brenda went back to her phone, and Tommy Garrett stared at a tabletop and said nothing. He paused it when Chester mouthed her name at the door. "That's my father," James said quietly, trying to hold on to one thing. He turned the tablet face down on the table. "Ruth," he said the first time he'd used her name directly, and he said it with a respect that was not performed. "Your granddaughter paid $9. She did not have to keep my father warm and oriented long enough for someone to find him. The medical team at Harlow County told me that another hour outside in those temperatures in his condition could have caused serious harm." He paused. "She may have saved his life. I don't use that phrase loosely." Ruth's hand tightened on Zara's wrist. Zara opened her mouth. I know," James said. "You just did what was in front of you. I understand that. That's actually the point." He looked at her steadily. "But I watched 17 other people encounter my father between 3 p.m. and 9 p.m. last night. We have him on traffic cameras on a gas station feed on footage from the pharmacy on Route 9. And he reached into the briefcase and produced a printed sheet, a timeline, a series of stills. 17 people. A woman who crossed the street. A man at the gas station who pointed at the road and kept walking. A pharmacist who told him she was closing." He set the sheet on the table. Didn't dwell on it. And then he walked into a diner in Harlow, and a 16-year-old girl with $9 in her apron pocket sat with him for 34 minutes. The room was quiet. Sandra opened the briefcase from her side and began laying documents on the coffee table in a neat row, the way you lay cards, deliberate, each one meaning something. The first was a check. James slid it toward Zara. $75, he said, "for your Georgia State application fee. I want to be precise about something. This is not a gift. This is what was taken from you. You spent $9 of your earned tip money. The remaining $66 represents the cost of what Brenda Mackey and Dale Holt cost you last night in lost wages, lost shift, and the specific humiliation of having your work mocked in a public room." He said it simply, without heat, like a man reading a correct accounting. "It's yours." Zara looked at the check. Her name written in clean black ink. $75. She picked it up with both hands. The second document was a letter. Sandra explained it before James could, her voice professional, precise, kind, in a way that didn't draw attention to itself. "This is a letter of personal recommendation from Mr. Baines to the Georgia State University Scholarship Office," Sandra said, "nominating you for the Baines Foundation Academic Excellence Award. 4 years, $40,000. Ruth's hand left Zara's wrist. Ruth pressed both her own hands flat against her knees, looked at the ceiling for a moment, and breathed. "The third document," James said, his voice quieter now, "is an email thread. My attorney sent it to the Harlow County Sheriff's Office at 7:52 this morning, with the security footage attached in full. It formally documents Deputy Holt's conduct and requests an internal review." He paused. "That process is now in motion. I have also retained local counsel on your behalf at no cost to you in the event you wish to pursue anything further. Zara set the check down carefully on the table. Her hands were not quite steady. I also want to be honest with you about something, James said. I didn't come here because I felt guilty. I came here because my father, who built things his whole life, who worked for 40 years to leave something worth leaving, looked at me from a hospital bed last night and said your name like it was the most important thing he still knew. His voice was even, but something moved behind it. He has a condition that takes things from him, every month a little more. But he remembered you. He reached into the briefcase one more time. There's one more document, he said. He set it on the table between them. Zara looked at it, then at James, then back at the document. Ruth leaned forward in her recliner to read the header. The room went very still. The document had 3 lines of header text. Harlow County Property Registry, Deed of Transfer, Parcel 14B, Piney Creek Road, adjacent lot 0.31 acres. Ruth read it once. Read it again. Her lips moved slightly on the second pass, the way they did when she was making absolutely certain she understood something before she allowed herself to react to it. That lot, James said, has been county-owned and vacant for 11 years. I purchased it this morning through a private sale completed at 7:15 a.m. The deed is being transferred to Ruth Evelina Coleman, free and clear, no liens, no conditions. He looked at Ruth directly. It's yours. Garden space, building space, whatever you want to do with it. Nobody can touch it. Ruth looked at the deed for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was the voice of a woman who had learned long ago not to let herself want things too loudly, because wanting things loudly was how you got hurt. Why? She said. Because you raised her, James said simply. And that matters. Ruth pressed her lips together, looked at the ceiling again, did not cry, or rather chose not to visibly, in the way of someone who has decided that tears are for later in private, when the magnitude of a thing can be properly felt. The 4th document, the last one, was a healthcare enrollment form already completed in Sandra's neat handwriting, awaiting only Ruth's signature. Baines Family Health Initiative, Sandra said. Your outstanding medical debt, $3,400, has been cleared as of this morning. Going forward, your insulin prescription specialist visits and associated costs are covered in full for 4 years under our Foundation's Healthcare Assistance Program. She set a pen on top of the form. All this needs is your signature. Ruth looked at the insulin entry. The $260 monthly line zeroed out. She looked at it for long enough that the room got quiet in a specific way, the quiet of people giving someone space to absorb something they've needed for a long time. Then she picked up the pen and signed her name. Ruth Evelina Coleman. The same signature she'd been writing for 63 years. Decisive, unhurried, the letters large and clear. She set the pen down, looked at Zara. Baby, she said. You didn't tell me. Zara understood what she meant. All of it, the essay Holt, the tray, the $9. Everything Zara had walked home with and folded away to keep Ruth from worrying. I didn't want you to worry, Zara said. Ruth reached over and took her granddaughter's face in both hands, the gesture of a woman who had done this since Zara was small, cupping her face to make sure she was seen clearly. She didn't say anything for a moment. You are so much more than this town has ever let you be, Ruth said. You hear me? Zara nodded. Her jaw was tight. Say you hear me. I hear you, Nana. Ruth let go, straightened, looked at James Baines with the clear, measuring gaze of a woman restoring herself to full height. Thank you, she said, for seeing her. She made it easy, James said. 3 days later, Deputy Dale Holt was placed on administrative leave pending a formal internal affairs investigation. The Harlow County Sheriff's Office released a two-sentence statement confirming the review. It did not name the complainant. It did not need to. By the end of that week, 2 other families in Harlow had come forward with documented complaints about Holt incidents that had been filed, processed, and quietly set aside over the past 4 years. With the Baines legal team's involvement, those files were reopened. Brenda Mackey called Zara on a Thursday evening 6 days after the helicopter. Zara was at the kitchen table working on her Georgia state application when the phone rang. She looked at the screen, looked at it for 3 full rings. Then she set it face down on the table and went back to her essay. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. What she didn't know and wouldn't know for another 2 weeks was that Brenda's diner had lost 3 catering contracts that same week. A corporate lunch account, a county school board order, and a private events booking, all quietly withdrawn by organizations with indirect ties to Baines-affiliated business partners. No one made an announcement. No one sent a letter. The contracts simply did not renew. The following Sunday, Reverend Marcus Dupree preached a sermon at First Baptist Church of Harlow that made no explicit reference to any specific event, but discussed at considerable length the parable of the Good Samaritan, the particular moral cost of silence, and the ways in which a community reveals its character not in its finest moments, but in its smallest ones. He did not mention Zara by name. He didn't have to. By Sunday, everyone in Harlow already knew. 2 weeks after the helicopter, a card arrived in the mailbox at the end of Piney Creek Road. Plain envelope, no return address, a Harlow postmark. Inside, a single index card in an elderly man's handwriting. Large, slightly uneven letters, the pen pressed hard, as though to make it permanent. You stayed. Most people don't stay, Chester. Zara read it standing at the mailbox in the afternoon light. Read it again. Then she walked back to the house up the porch steps, stepping over the third one, automatically went to her room, and pinned the card above her desk. To the left of it, her Georgia state application completed, sealed, ready to mail. To the right, the $75 check stub already deposited, fee already paid. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in late November, Zara came downstairs to find Ruth sitting at the kitchen table in her housecoat, holding an envelope with the Georgia State University seal on the upper left corner. Ruth looked up. Her eyes were bright. "It came," she said. Zara sat down across from her. The envelope sat between them on the table. Neither of them moved for a moment. "Open it," Zara said. "It's yours," Ruth said. "You open it." Zara picked it up. The letter was 2 pages. Zara read the first paragraph and stopped. Read it again. Set the pages flat on the table and pressed both palms down on top of them, as though they might otherwise lift away. "Baby," Ruth said. "What does it say?" Zara looked up. Her face was doing several things at once, the particular expression of someone receiving news. They have worked for so long and so hard that the actual arrival of it doesn't feel like an event, so much as a shift in gravity. Like the world has quietly rearranged itself around a new center. "Full admission," she said. "And the Baines Foundation scholarship," she swallowed. 4 years, $40,000. Ruth stood up from the kitchen table slowly, the way she did when her joints were stiff in the mornings. She walked around to Zara's side of the table. She put her arms around her granddaughter from behind both arms, the full weight of them, and held on. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Outside, through the kitchen window, the vegetable garden was bare for winter. The snap pea lines were empty. The tomato stakes stood in their rows like small sentinels waiting for spring. The lot next door, Parcel 14B, now Ruth Evelina Coleman's, was covered in frost, flat and open and full of potential. Ruth had already been making plans for it. She hadn't said so explicitly, but Zara had found a graph paper sketch on the kitchen counter 2 weeks ago, raised beds drawn in Ruth's precise hand labeled in her careful writing. Collards, tomatoes, sweet potatoes. A section marked neighbors with a small asterisk. The broken third porch step had been fixed the week before. A man from the congregation at First Baptist had come over on a Saturday morning with lumber and a toolbox and spent 40 minutes on it without being asked and without accepting payment. He'd heard the story from Reverend Dupree's Sunday sermon and decided that fixing a porch step was within his power and therefore his responsibility. He was right. The Baines Character Initiative was announced publicly in Atlanta in early December. James held a press conference in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of Baines Development Group's headquarters. Olivia beside him, Sandra managing the press logistics with her customary precision. $25 million. Students across the South. Selected not for grades alone, but for demonstrated character. Specific documented acts of integrity, community contribution, grace under circumstances that did not require grace of them. James spoke for 11 minutes. He did not use notes. Near the end, he said, "We are not looking for perfect students. We are looking for honest ones. For students who understand that what you do when no one is watching, or when everyone is watching, and no one else is acting, is the most accurate measure of who you are." At the back of the room, a journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution typed quickly. The following morning, the story ran above the fold with a photograph of the diner security footage, Zara's hands on the counter, the $9 laid out, and a headline that Harlow, Georgia would clip and frame and argue about for years. One girl, $9. A $25 million answer. Zara was named inaugural scholar of the Baines Character Initiative at a small ceremony in January held in the Harlow County Public Library because that was what she'd requested when James asked her where she'd like it to be. Not Atlanta. Not a hotel ballroom. The library where she'd printed her scholarship essay, where she'd done her homework on Tuesday evenings, where Mrs. Aldridge from the school had first handed her a college prep guide 3 years ago and said quietly, "You should look at this." Chester attended in a wheelchair pushed by his aide. He was having a good day, lucid present, his pale blue eyes clear. When Zara walked across the small room to shake his hand, he looked at her for a moment and then pointed at James. "That's her," he said. "That's the girl." "I know, Dad," James said. "She stayed," Chester said. He looked at Zara. "Most people don't stay." "You told me," Zara said, "in your card." He smiled the full, unguarded smile of someone who has just been told they were remembered. "Good," he said. "Good." 1 year after the helicopter landed in the field on Piney Creek Road, Zara Coleman was a first-semester student at Georgia State University, studying public policy, maintaining a 3.8 GPA, and volunteering on Tuesday evenings at a community kitchen in the old Fourth Ward neighborhood of Atlanta. She wore a name tag on Tuesdays. Zara. Nothing else. On a cold evening in January, she was working the serving line when a teenage boy came through, 16, maybe 17, thin jacket, a geometry textbook under his arm. The look of someone who had done some math on the walk over and arrived at an answer he didn't like. He reached the end of the line with a tray, looked at the cashier, counted what was in his palm. $3.50. The full plate was $6. His face did what faces do in that moment. The specific small collapse of someone absorbing a disappointment they don't have the energy to argue with. Zara stepped out from behind the line. "I've got the rest," she said. He looked at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said. "Sit anywhere you want." He hesitated, the hesitation of someone trying to figure out what this costs, what it means, what will be expected of him for it. Someone did the same for me once. Zara said. A long time ago, except it was soup. She smiled. Just pass it on someday. That's all. He took his tray to a table by the window, ate, opened his geometry textbook, did his homework. Zara watched him for a moment through the serving window. Then she went back to work. Outside, Atlanta moved through its January evening cold, lit, loud, indifferent, in the way of cities which are also somehow, in their density, capable of extraordinary, specific kindness. The kind that happens between two people when one of them decides not to look away. On Piney Creek Road in Harlow, Georgia, Ruth Coleman's vegetable garden was dormant for winter. The frost-covered lot next door waited full of plans. The third porch step held firm, and somewhere in a care facility 11 miles south of Atlanta, an old man with a failing memory was sleeping. On the nightstand beside his bed, placed there by his son that morning, a photograph printed from security footage, slightly grainy, the timestamp visible in the corner. A girl at a diner counter, $9 laid out in her palm. The expression on her face already decided. Chester had asked for it himself on one of his good days. He wanted to remember. Zara Coleman had $9 and chose someone else's hunger. Not because she could afford to, because she couldn't afford not to and remain the person she had decided to be. The $9 became $40,000, not because kindness guarantees reward, but because one man paid attention. 17 people walked past that night. Only one stayed. You will encounter someone this week who needs the one who stays. Don't calculate the cost. Just stay. If this story moved something in you, say so. In the comments, tell us where you're watching from and what it made you feel. And if you believe that ordinary people doing quiet things in unlit rooms can change the shape of a life, subscribe. There are more stories here worth staying for.